Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dissenter Weekly Update for January 3rd, 2020. I'm Kevin Gosztola, Managing Editor for Shadowproof.com. We launched this show in 2019, and each week we run down the latest news in whistleblowing and related press freedom stories. We also highlight developments with WikiLeaks, Julian Assange, and Chelsea Manning. On today's show, we welcome guest host John Kiriakou. He is a CIA whistleblower and a former senior investigator with the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He's also a good friend of Shadowproof. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for having me.
So on today's show, we'll be talking about more documents from WikiLeaks that expose fraud in an OPCW investigation in Syria, as well as Trump's assassination of an Iranian general and how that pertains to the war on whistleblowers. But first, we encourage viewers to hit the red subscribe button below this video to follow our show. And remember that Shadowproof is a 100% reader-funded and supported website. Our ability to do this show depends on your financial support. If you want to help us sustain this show and grow as an organization, please donate or become a member at shadowproof.com/donate. So to begin, we'll do our first topic, which is related to Amazon and critics who have been outspoken against Amazon. Two Amazon employees were informed they could be fired after they spoke out against Amazon. Maren Costa and Jamie Kowalski previously said Amazon's cloud computing business aids oil and gas exploration. Costa recalled, "It was scary to be called into a meeting like that and then to be given a follow-up email saying that if I continued to speak up, I could be fired. But I spoke up because I'm terrified by the harm the climate crisis is already causing, and I fear for my children's future." So, John, to you, I mean, we've seen in the close of 2019 these horrific images from Australia of these brush fires. We've seen other examples of these natural disasters in the last year, or these natural occurrences that show the effects. And yet we have this major mega corporation like Amazon cracking down on employees' freedom of speech.
Yeah, this is a very disturbing development inside a company that has already given us lots of different reasons to be concerned. You know, Amazon, it was reported just recently in the last couple of months, for example, does
It's like we're having a connection issue.
Give its own employees a cup or a jar and throw it away. They're not even allowed to go to the bathroom. Now, here we have an example of employees reporting waste, fraud, abuse, or illegality, the very definition of whistleblowing, being threatened with the loss of their employment, and then the actual loss of their employment following the warnings. So, yeah, this is just another reason to hate Amazon and companies like Amazon, and it's another reason to go to our elected officials to complain, because there have to be protections, and they have to be codified protections for whistleblowers in corporate settings as well as governmental.
All right, thanks for that, John. We're going to go on to the next story, which involves a whistleblower lawsuit in Pittsburgh. Jeremy Roloff, the CEO of the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, has said that he wants UPMC to become the quote-unquote Amazon of healthcare. And in a recent development, we saw in the final week of 2019 that a whistleblower lawsuit against UPMC Neurosurgeons was reinstated by a federal appeals court. It alleges that starting in 2006, Neurosurgeons, quote, inflated the number of spine operations they did while performing needlessly complex medical procedures to beef up their earnings, quote. And that was in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, a local newspaper. Again, this shows the profit motive in healthcare and how it makes it really difficult for people to guarantee that they're actually getting the appropriate treatment they deserve.
This is really an example of corporate greed. I'm from the Pittsburgh area. I was born and raised in the Pittsburgh area. I can tell you that the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center is one of the most highly respected medical, what can you call it, a conglomerate in the United States. On top of that, the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette is a very serious newspaper. It's a serious investigative journalism site. The Pittsburgh is telling us, besides the fact that there was this profit motive and that UPMC was trying to maximize profits, was that they were purposely putting people's lives at risk in order to maximize these profits. That it takes a certain kind of sickness, I believe. I think this is a bigger story than the national media has given it credit for being. Frankly, the reporting has pretty much only been in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. This is something that needs to go national because I believe it's indicative of a bigger and broader problem throughout healthcare.
Yeah, and for those people who follow whistleblowing issues closely, they're accused of violating kickback statutes. They're also accused of violating the False Claims Act. Maybe you have some knowledge of the False Claims Act. I know that this is a very useful tool that people have used who are interested in challenging the culture of fraud in this country. Seem to be having a connection issue, John.
Yeah, I just got back. I just heard you. I got most of your question. Yeah, this is exactly why the False Claims Act was passed into law in the first place. It was to expose and to out organized. I'm using the air quotes around organized criminal activity when it comes to inflating billing operations. So we go after the mafia, for example, using RICO statutes. Well, this is kind of the RICO statute of healthcare. We have this law for a reason. We have this law because earlier whistleblowers have shown us that such a law was necessary. If this brings down doctors, neurosurgeons, if it brings down corporate leaders at UPMC Health and UPMC Medical Center, then it needs to be done.
All right. And just like to acknowledge that there's a little bit of a problem with the connection, but we're going to keep pressing on. So in the past weeks of 2019, we had WikiLeaks, despite the fact that Julian Assange their founder is in jail, facing this extradition case on 17 counts of violating the Espionage Act. We have an organization that has been under attack still doing crucial work, and they've been working to expose fraud in the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons investigation into an alleged chemical attack in Douma, Syria in April 2018. They released a fourth batch of documents from whistleblowers, and it contained further proof victims in videos that we all saw were not suffering from toxic chlorine gas, as symptoms were inconsistent. We're also finding that one of the engineers who is a whistleblower in this has had his work suppressed and essentially was informed or found out that his work was going to be removed from a database so that nobody knew that it had any existence whatsoever, or that it had not been done in connection with this investigation. I wonder, what are your comments on this effort that WikiLeaks has been involved in to aid these professionals in exposing what the OPCW did?
Yeah, this is a far bigger deal than Friday within the OPCW. What this is 15 separate investigators objecting to the fact that their analysis was either taken out of context or it was falsified entirely, that the OPCW's final analysis of events on the ground following the alleged, we now know, false chemical attack in Douma took place. The conclusion was that there was no evidence to indicate that such an attack took place, that the information was falsified, and it was the false information that was used to come to a political conclusion. So the fact that these whistleblowers came out, I think, is wonderful. It was very brave act. The fact that they had to rely on WikiLeaks to do that's very, very sad to me. But it also, as you pointed out, serves to remind us that not to the canvas with the arrest and prosecution of Julian Assange, but they keep plugging away, and they keep coming out with these original first-person documents, proving that so much of what we know from the mainstream media is just a false narrative. We wouldn't know any of this story without WikiLeaks.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just wanted to mention a quote from one of these documents that was put up on WikiLeaks website, where it mentioned that the experts stated that the onset of excessive frothing as a result of pulmonary edema observed in photos and reported by witnesses would not occur in the short time period between the reported occurrence of the alleged incident and the time the videos were recorded. So approximately 3 to 4 hours. And then furthermore, and this is from a toxicology meeting that took place June 2018. They say the experts were also of the opinion it was highly unlikely that victims would have gathered in piles at the center of their respective apartments at such a short distance from an escape from any toxic chlorine gas to cleaner air. And you also see things here like that suggest in one of the other email threads that have been shared suggests that the death of the circumstances of death for the victims do not match chlorine rather than corpses arranged for propaganda purposes. So one of the things that's been key about these documents that's been showing is the very likelihood that much of this was staged for us.
Yeah. And it's funny, that's what the investigator said from the very beginning, and nobody paid any attention to them. So even after these revelations from WikiLeaks, we see shows like Morning Joe on MSNBC. Another one is Ali Velshi on CNN, repeating this narrative that there was a chlorine gas attack in Douma, that the chlorine gas attack was just simply is not true.
In a letter to the UK government, we had UN Special Rapporteur Nils Melzer share his strong objection to the UK government's indifference toward Julian Assange's ongoing abuse and mistreatment. This was a quote that was in his letter. No objective observer can escape the conclusion that Mr. Assange's due process rights have been seriously, consistently, and deliberately violated in every phase of each judicial proceeding conducted against him in all involved jurisdictions. So we had this really strong letter, and it was pointing out how Julian Assange, all of this evidence of psychological torture was brought to the attention of the UK government, and then yet they continue to deny that any such torture has taken place. And in fact, Nils Melzer doesn't stop at Assange's abuse. He also connects it to the fact that the British government has done nothing to comply with requests and or the effort of UN officials to urge the British government to care about their involvement in the torture and rendition program. And so Nils Melzer connects their indifference to Julian Assange's torture to their indifference to getting accountability or seeking accountability for torture and rendition. Your comments, John?
Yeah, this is an important statement coming from the United Nations Special Rapporteur. I'm afraid that it's been largely ignored, at least by the U.S. and British governments. I'm in touch with Julian Assange's attorneys, and this is a real concern that they have. When we read in the media, for example, Kevin, that Julian struggles to remember his own name, or that he is unable to participate in his own defense, they're serious about this. They're not making this up. They're not exaggerating their experience and their contacts with him. This is a real thing, and it's because the American and British governments are breaking him mentally and emotionally. They're doing it deliberately. They're doing it with malice aforethought, and the United Nations, thank goodness, has recognized that. Now, what's more important is that we need a judge to recognize that. His hearing for extradition to the United States is coming up in February. I know that you'll be there. These hearings normally take...
Nope, we lost John.
hearings normally take about 4 hours. This one is scheduled to be something like 4 weeks. So perhaps there's a chance that that something good may come of this. I don't know. I don't think any of us know, including his own attorneys. I was also glad to see that the special rapporteur mentioned Chelsea Manning. That Chelsea Manning, her treatment is also akin to torture. Chelsea Manning has not even been charged with a crime. She's being held in contempt of court for refusing to testify against Julian Assange before a grand jury. Jeremy Hammond, the famed anonymous hacker, is also being held without charge for failing to testify against Julian in a grand jury. These grand juries are renewed even after their term runs out, and as a result, people like Chelsea and Jeremy can be held literally indefinitely. Now, Julian's already been charged with a crime, and there's a law in the United States saying that a grand jury cannot be impaneled or cannot continue to be impaneled once the charges have been levied. Well, this tells me that either the Department of Justice is breaking the law in continuing to hold Chelsea and Jeremy, or they intend to add additional charges onto the 24+ charges they've already filed against Julian. It's something that we probably won't know the truth about until at least February and probably March.
As you mentioned, Nils Melzer also wrote a letter to the U.S. government on Manning's coercive confinement, and it seems to be the first time that he put something together. Importantly, he references his predecessor, Juan Mendez, who we both know very well, had determined that Manning was tortured, if not cruelly and inhumanely treated, while she was confined at Quantico after being arrested for disclosing documents to WikiLeaks. And Chelsea had her own reaction to all of this. She said that, "I am thrilled to see the practice of coercive confinement called out for what it is, incompatible with international human rights standards. Regardless, even knowing I am very likely to stay in jail for an even longer time, I'm never backing down." And so that was a big deal there. Your comments on Chelsea, anything else you might have to add on Chelsea Manning?
I've got to say, Chelsea Manning has been through a lot over the last decade plus. I have to say that I am absolutely astounded at the level of strength and mettle that she has displayed. These coercive detentions are meant solely to break people. And to tell you the truth, Chelsea could have gotten out of this early on by playing a little game with the prosecutors. She could have gone before that grand jury and answered every question with the response, "I don't recall." Plain and simple. And they would have had to let her go. She was offered immunity and refused the immunity, saying that immunity was unnecessary because everything that they wanted to ask her before the grand jury, she had already testified to in her own trial in a military court. And she urged them just to take the transcript of her own testimony and enter that into the record. So she could have, and the third thing is she could have testified against Julian, but she stood up and she refused. So this is an unusual toughness. This is a toughness and fortitude that we don't normally see on a day-to-day basis. I have mad respect for Chelsea Manning and for the way she has stood up.
And one of the things that we've been doing on this show is we give people an update on the amount of time that these cases that we're following. So before we move on to the last looser discussions that we have for the end of the show, it's 296 days that Chelsea Manning has been in jail. She owes $187,000 in fines now. And of course, we also know that Julian Assange has now been in jail. It's going on 9 months, and he served a 50-week sentence for violating bail conditions already, and yet, as highlighted in Nils Melzer's letter, not released on house arrest, so unable to prepare an adequate defense. You mentioned Jeremy Hammond. So Jeremy Hammond is now in the Alexandria Detention Center, the same one that Chelsea Manning is being held. And particularly for him, it's important for people to note that it's not clear what has happened to his sentence because he was originally sentenced to 10 years for violating the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. And so it's not clear if that sentence has been suspended so that he can be punished for contempt of grand jury. Do you know if...
No, I don't know, but there's another important point there. I'm glad that you raised that because you've reminded me. Jeremy was participating in something called RDAP. That's the Residential Drug and Alcohol Program. It's a Bureau of Prisons program that allows you to go through something like 10 or 12 months of drug and alcohol counseling. The fact of the matter is, at least in the prison that I was in, you go every week and you watch videotaped episodes of Intervention from A&E. That counts as your drug and alcohol counseling. And then at the end of it, you have up to 18 months taken off your sentence. But you have to complete the whole year before you get the reward. Well, Jeremy had 2 months left to go in his RDAP counseling. They yanked him out of RDAP to send him to Alexandria jail, the federal holding center in Alexandria, Virginia, where he's refusing to testify in the grand jury against Julian Assange. That means that they have effectively added 18 months to his sentence. So even if he had agreed to testify, this was just a way to screw Jeremy Hammond and to lengthen his sentence.
All right. And then we'll also just mention that Reality Winner is still serving her sentence and that continues. She's the NSA whistleblower. She's doing a sentence in a facility in Texas. Terry Albury is still completing his sentence. He's an FBI whistleblower. And then there's another case, but we'll get to it at the end of the show. So I wanted to catch up with you because one thing we've mostly ignored on the show was this Ukraine call whistleblower because it's dominated attention. And the whole purpose of doing this show has been to cover these whistleblower stories that don't get covered in the media. But I wanted to talk with you because you were one of the first people that I talked to when this all started to get reported. And I wanted to know what you thought about it. And there's been discussion about, whether this person's a whistleblower or not. But, in the last week or two, it's become this big thing where Trump gets accused of retaliating against the whistleblower by naming the whistleblower. The Republicans go on Twitter and they share a name and they get accused of naming the whistleblower. It seems kind of silly, but then it also is connected to something serious, I think, because we don't really want public officials just outing whistleblowers randomly in order to go after them. And I think the biggest problem that I have is that we have a clear case here of a partisan whistleblower. And so it's been really difficult to figure out what is the truth in all of this.
Yeah, let me get one thing out of the way right off the bat. I'm on record. You were the first person I spoke to about this, but I'm on record as saying that I don't believe that this is a real whistleblower. And it's not because the whistleblower has taken one partisan position or taken another partisan position. It's that there's a very specific MO that one has to go through to report waste, fraud, abuse, or illegality in the intelligence community. You go to your supervisor, from there to the inspector general. The inspector general then goes to the oversight committees. That's not what happened, not even remotely close to what happened in this case. In this case, the whistleblower went to his supervisor went to the inspector general. The inspector general, though, then went to the general counsel's office. The general counsel went to the CIA leadership, back to the inspector general, to the DNI inspector general, and then not to the oversight committees, but to the Justice Department. So what we ended up with, if you read this CIA whistleblower complaint, is not a straight account of what the whistleblower claims to have seen or wants to reveal. It's a very legalistic document, clearly written by a team of attorneys. Now, at the CIA, on the analytics side, where this whistleblower supposedly is, you go through 6 months of writing training at the CIA's famed training facility called the Farm, known as the Farm. And they do that because they want every CIA analyst to write in exactly the same style, so that when the president reads the PDB, the President's Daily Brief, every morning, no matter who wrote it, it looks exactly the same. But this whistleblower complaint is not in that CIA DI writing style. It's in the style of attorneys. And that tells me that whatever information the whistleblower initially reported or wanted to report, it was overtaken by the CIA's general counsel and the CIA's leadership, and then reported back to the DNI. It never made its way to the oversight committee like it was supposed to. And I believe that it was in part fabricated. So I don't take this whistleblower seriously. I actually went on one of the news shows and said that I didn't think it was a whistleblower. I thought it was an anonymous source for the Democratic staff of the House Intelligence Committee. Now, with that said and out of the way, I can't see any reason, any legitimate reason why you would have to reveal the identity of the whistleblower. That just doesn't make any sense to me. Now, internally in the CIA, that whistleblower is probably never going to work in a serious job again, even if he's able to remain inside the CIA. The battle lines are going to be drawn. His career is finished. If his identity is revealed, and it pretty much already has been, he's going to have trouble even getting follow-on employment. And that's just not fair. We can disagree about the methodology. We can disagree about the information or the import of the information, but ruining the guy on purpose is exactly what we should be standing up and opposing. At least I know you and I have opposed it from the very beginning. I think it's just wrong.
Yeah. Well, and I think that one of the things, so there are 2 points and then we'll move on to the last thing. But one issue is this tug of war between whether it's journalism or whether it's trying to out the person. I think that if you're a journalist, you reasonably would start to have questions about where this person comes from, who surrounds them, what was the genesis of these allegations, and how they came to be public. I think that's a fair thing to explore. Now, initially, I remember talking to you about the way the New York Times went and reported it, but that was because they were just splashing that this was a CIA person with no context whatsoever. And that was my objection. But I suppose a more significant thing to talk about is this narrative, which is, I suppose this Ukraine call whistleblower can now claim to be hugely instrumental in the House impeachment of President Donald Trump. And how should we process that?
Yeah, it goes to motivation. And whistleblower attorneys will tell you that motivation is irrelevant. If a person is reporting waste, fraud, abuse, illegality, or threats to the public health or public safety, that's all that matters. Motivation is irrelevant to the argument. But I struggle with that because in this case, it seems to me that motivation would be the heart of the argument. I would want to know what the whistleblower's motivation was. Because it would help me to conclude whether or not it was a real whistleblower. But we spent, a day or 2 days on that issue when the New York Times, as you rightly say, splashed it on the front page. And then everybody just stopped talking about it.
Oh, and sorry, do you think there's any merit to Republicans complaining that they can't interview this person, or is it fair because of the way we've seen behavior reported for them to not have access to this person?
No, I think they should have access. When I blew the whistle on the torture program, I was subpoenaed by the Senate Armed Services Committee. And I went up to the Armed Services Committee and met with the staff for a solid 8 or 9 hours. It was half Democratic and half Republican. We were in the vault, the skiff it's called, so we could speak freely and we could speak, in a classified setting. And the questions from both sides were all relevant. They were all down in the weeds. They were all investigative in nature. And while I fully recognize how partisan Capitol Hill is, especially at a time like this, I can't help but to think that the staffs, at least, would have been professional, and the Republicans probably should have had the opportunity to interview that whistleblower.
All right. So the last thing that I wanted to talk to you about involved this assassination of an Iranian general that vividly played out less than 24 hours ago. And we learned that Trump had himself apparently authorized this drone strike on the Iranian general. It was in Baghdad. It was on an airstrip that apparently, I understand, he was killed. And the point I wanted to make with you here was, and how it relates to the show, is that we had a lot of whistleblowing on this assassination complex, as it's been described, or the drone programs, the military as well as the CIA. We had a lot of public information that warned us of what could happen if somebody like President Donald Trump was elected and was able to use this power. We criticized Barack Obama constantly for his appointing himself judge, jury, and executioner. A lot of people who were critics and these whistleblowers were shooed away and told to be quiet because it was President Obama and he's a smart person and we should trust him. And then it turns out now this is where we find ourselves with a very dramatic escalation that could be happening between the U.S. and Iran. Your thoughts?
Yeah, this is why we owe such a great debt of gratitude to people like David Hale, one of the brave drone whistleblowers. He warned us that this was going to happen, and you're exactly right that we gave Barack Obama so much slack in this illegal program. You know, it's not legal to send drones to other countries and to just rocket people without due process, without the right to confront their accusers in a court of law before a jury of their peers. Whether we like their politics or not is irrelevant. What's relevant is that they have the same constitutional protections, at least they're supposed to, that everybody else has. And so Barack Obama got away with it for so long. The inevitable continuation was going to be Donald Trump getting away with it. And now we have Donald Trump killing arguably the second most important person in Iran, a potential successor to the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. We're talking about Qassim Soleimani. And there's going to be retaliation. You know, an Iranian journalist tweeted last night that he asked Iranian officials, isn't it true that this is like killing Petraeus or Mattis? And the response was, no, this is far worse than killing Petraeus or Mattis. This is like killing Pence. And so, you know, everybody's talking about de-escalation. De-escalation's a pipe dream. Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State and former CIA director, was on Fox and Friends this morning, in which he said, incredibly, we're in you know, Orwellian craziness right now. He said that this was a move that was made in order to help de-escalation, and that by killing Soleimani, we saved untold number of lives of Muslims. And of course, all the nattering nabobs on Fox just nodded their heads over and over. That made total sense. That by taking out the number 2 most powerful person in Iran, that's going to help bring peace to the region, and it's going to make Muslims safer. That's what we're dealing with here.
Yeah, and we also heard, I believe, from people like Pompeo that they're going to wake up in the morning and thank us for what we had done. Echoing Dick Cheney's, they'll be greeting us as liberators when we come to Iraq. And I think a good point to close here is just to make it abundantly clear that one of the things we need most are whistleblowers from the military and these national security or intelligence agencies who can come forward right now and speak out about what is happening. We don't get that enough, but we also know, in particular with Iran, what makes it so dangerous is how both political parties are extremely reluctant to be sober and objective in their responses to the actions of the Iranian government and other players in Iran. And we've seen in the last 10 to 20 years, in public reporting, a lot of evidence of what the U.S. has done against Iran. And they have a lot of reason to view us as aggressors. And this kind of activity to constantly be carried out by people in the Trump administration, it does not come without its consequences, which is why it's important for whistleblowers in the Trump administration to be listened to if they were to come forward.
And we need to pay very, very close attention to what the Democratic candidates for president are saying about this assassination. So far, only Bernie Sanders and Tulsi Gabbard have condemned it. Everybody else, and I'm talking from Joe Biden and Elizabeth Warren on down, they have all fallen into line with the neoliberal Pentagon intelligence community.
Yeah, I believe Warren and Biden both echoed the idea that he deserved to die.
Yes.
So okay, well, it's been good to have you on as a guest. We apologize.
Always a pleasure.
We apologize for the connection issues earlier for those of you who have been watching, but it did get much better in the last 15 or 20 minutes. So that's really great. And it's always good to talk to you. So we'll have you back on later on this year to go through some more stories. But thanks again, John. And
Thanks, Kevin.
We'll have links to all the articles that we mentioned. And again, please hit that subscribe button below. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter at ShadowproofCom, and support us for even just a few dollars a month at shadowproof.com/donate. We have all kinds of member perks, from tote bags to a member newsletter and a chat room. And your donations will go directly to keeping us online and funding reporting from talented freelance journalists. Once again, I'm going to be going to London in February, so your support is going to help me be able to be there for the 3 to 4 weeks that this extradition hearing against Julian Assange is expected to go. So thanks again, everyone, and please send us any feedback and tell your friends about us, and have a great rest of your week.